All right, welcome to another deep dive. You know how this works. You hit us up with stuff you're grappling with, could be articles, research, even just a jumbled pile of notes, and we sift through it, right? We try
Mhm.
to find those golden nuggets, the aha moments where it all kind of clicks.
The good stuff.
Yeah, exactly, the good stuff. And today we're going deep on something a lot of you have been asking about, which is how to make peer feedback really work in writing. Especially for those younger writers, we've got a whole stack of research here. And our aim isn't to just say, yeah, peer feedback, it helps. We want to find out the secret sauce. Like, what are the specific approaches and techniques that can transform peer review from just another classroom thing into a real learning powerhouse?
Yeah, absolutely.
And to help us untangle all of this, we've got our expert here ready to connect the dots.
Yeah, I'm excited to dive into this. It's a topic with uh, quite a bit of history and some really fascinating nuances.
Perfect. So let's set the stage a bit. From what we've got here, peer response in writing, this isn't exactly a brand new idea, is it?
No, not at all. It's been around for a while.
It's been a focus in writing instruction for at least 40 years. Really started taking off in the late 60s. Thinkers like Elbow, Graves, Murray, they were all big proponents early on. What was the big shift, the change in thinking that really led to this emphasis on, students giving feedback to each other?
Well, I think what's really interesting to think about is that back then, the focus in a lot of writing classrooms was so much on the final product, the
Mhm.
finished essay, the perfect paragraph, all
What
that.
tallish thing.
Right, exactly. The evaluation came after the writing was all done. And so peer response was part of this movement to bring the process of writing, the actual process, into the light, to get students really involved in the drafting, the revising, the whole journey of creating a piece of writing.
So it's like instead of judging the finished dish, you're actually
Right.
getting involved in the cooking while it's all happening.
That's
Now, when we talk about peer response, it seems like our sources here are using it pretty broadly. It's not just about those formal feedback sessions where you've got your checklist, right?
Oh, definitely not. The research uses peer response as this big umbrella term that covers a ton of different collaborative things students can do. Like you've got peer tutoring, general peer collaboration on writing stuff, specific feedback on drafts, even peer assessment. All that fits under this bigger concept of peer-assisted learning, or PL.
PL, okay.
And one of our sources has this great definition for it. People from similar social groups who aren't professional teachers helping each other learn and learning themselves by teaching.
Learning themselves by teaching. That's a really cool way to put it.
Yeah, I thought so too.
So what were people hoping for back then? What was the thinking behind why this peer interaction would be so good for young writers? What were they aiming for?
Okay, so the thinking was that this could help in a few key ways. One, by having their peers react to their writing, students would start to think more about their audience and their purpose. Who are they writing this for and why?
Right, that makes sense.
That's crucial, that goal orientation in writing. Another thought was that by sharing their work and getting responses, it creates this more genuine communication situation. So it boosts their motivation to actually write something meaningful because it's not just for the teacher.
Yeah, it's got a real audience.
Right. And then there's the idea that by talking about different texts together, students get a better grasp of different genres.
So they learn how different kinds of writing actually work.
Exactly. And then finally, the very act of talking about each other's writing forces them to develop a language for talking about language, what we call meta-language. And that's a big plus because it helps them get better at monitoring and revising their own work.
It's like they're becoming mini writing critics.
In a way, yeah. So all these potential benefits, they sounded great in theory. But when researchers actually looked at the big picture, did it live up to the hype? That's what the meta-studies try to tell us.
Right, the meta studies, those are basically studies of studies, right? Like
Right.
combining the results of a bunch of individual research projects.
Exactly. And several of these meta-studies did find that peer response, generally speaking, seems to have a positive effect on writing skills. Researchers like Andrews, Chapman, Graham, and Perrin, Hillocks, they all found evidence supporting it.
Okay, so on a large scale, it seems like it works. But there's a catch, right? You mentioned a key limitation with these meta studies. They showed that it could work, but not necessarily why or how.
Exactly. That's the thing. These big studies usually just compare different ways of teaching writing overall, like a classroom using peer response versus one that didn't. But they didn't really zero in on which specific parts of the peer response process or the instruction that went with it were actually making the difference. It's like, a healthy diet is good for you, but you don't know which specific foods or combinations are giving you the most benefits.
Like, is it the broccoli or the blueberries that are doing the heavy lifting?
Exactly. And so our deep dive today is all about figuring out those specific nutrients of peer response,
Yeah.
the things that actually make it work.
Love that analogy. Okay, so to get at those nutrients, researchers have looked at peer response through different lenses, different theories, and our sources highlight three key perspectives that have shaped how we understand and actually use peer feedback. What are those big three?
Okay, so first we've got the cognitive perspective. This one draws a lot on Piaget and Laurier's work. It sees writing as this complex mental activity with distinct stages like planning, drafting, revising. Important models here include Flower and Hayes. They looked at the writer's task environment, their memory, and the whole writing process. And then Bereiter and Scardamalia, they talked about this difference between knowledge telling, which is basically what less experienced writers do. They sort of just transcribe their thoughts versus knowledge transforming. That's when more skilled writers actually shape their ideas for a specific audience and purpose.
So knowledge telling is like stream of consciousness onto the page, and knowledge transforming is more strategic.
Exactly.
Okay, so where does peer response fit into this cognitive picture? How is it supposed to help from a cognitive perspective?
Well, this perspective really emphasizes how interaction with peers, especially during revision, can help writers develop that crucial awareness of their goals and audience.
That who am I writing this for and why question.
Why? Exactly. So when a peer reader says, hey, this part isn't clear to me, it forces the writer to step out of their own head to see their work through someone else's eyes.
Fresh perspective.
Exactly. And that can push them to use more effective revision strategies and to start thinking more consciously about their own writing process. It's
Yeah.
like they get this external prompt that becomes part of their internal dialogue as a writer.
I see. So it's like externalizing that internal critic.
Yes, exactly. Okay, now, the second big perspective is the social cognitive one. It builds on Vygotsky and Bandura's ideas. And this one shifts the focus to writing as a social thing, an interaction between writer and reader. It highlights things like social learning, Vygotsky's idea of the zone of proximal development, that space where a learner can do more with guidance than they could alone, and self-regulation in writing.
So this perspective is all about how we learn from each other and how we guide our own learning.
Right. Now think about it this way, Bruffy. He had this famous quote. He said, if our thoughts are just internalized conversations, then writing is like those conversations coming back out. So when peers react to a piece of writing, they're responding to those internalized thoughts. And this social interaction can make writers realize, oh, maybe I made some assumptions here, or this part isn't clear to someone else. Plus, having peers as your audience makes writing feel more real, more authentic, which can really boost a student's motivation and their belief in their own writing abilities.
Right. It's not just for the teacher anymore.
Exactly. And Bandura called this self-efficacy, that belief in your own ability to do something. All of this helps develop stronger self-regulation in their writing.
So they start to own their writing more.
Yes, exactly. Okay, so we've got the cognitive, the social cognitive, and then the third perspective is the genre perspective. This one is based on Halliday's work on functional linguistics, which says that language always serves a purpose. And different types of texts, different genres, have their own structures and features to achieve specific goals.
So like a persuasive essay is structured differently from a story.
Exactly. And learning to write well, from this viewpoint, is all about understanding genre, knowing the conventions of different types of writing.
So how does peer response help with that? How does it help students understand those different genres?
Well, this perspective sees peer response as a tool for making those genre-related purposes more obvious to students. Through talking with their peers, writers can think about, is my text actually doing what it's supposed to do? Am I using the right tools for this specific genre? Like a peer might say, hey, your story doesn't really have a beginning that grabs me, or you haven't given enough evidence for your argument in this essay.
So it helps them think about the bigger picture, not just the little details.
Exactly. And it also helps them develop that meta language, that vocabulary for talking about how different types of texts actually function.
I'm seeing now how these three perspectives, they kind of work together. Like different sides of the same coin. They're not really contradicting each other. They're just looking at different facets of learning to write and how peer interaction can play a role.
That's a great way to put it. They're complementary, not contradictory.
Okay, so with all these theoretical frameworks in mind, the researchers we've got here wanted to get down to brass tacks. They wanted to figure out that the specific things teachers can do, those concrete instructional components, to make peer response activities really boost students' writing skills.
Right. And they were specifically focused on that 6 to 15 age range.
The formative years for writing.
Exactly. Because that's when those fundamental writing skills are being developed.
Yeah.
So the impact of the right kind of instruction could be huge.
Makes sense. So their big research question was basically, what specific instructional components used alongside peer response are most effective for those younger writers? And they were looking at three main areas, right? Instruction and writing strategies, instruction in how to interact effectively, and instruction in genre knowledge.
That's it.
And to answer this, they did a deep dive of their own into a bunch of intervention studies.
They did a comprehensive review of research published between 1990 and 2011, all about peer response in writing instruction for those 6 to 15-year-olds.
Those kids learning in their native language.
Right. And they had specific rules for which studies to include. Like, the study had to clearly describe the teaching methods used, and it had to measure writing skills after the intervention.
They weren't messing around. They wanted good data.
Exactly. And they also cast a wide net in terms of what counted as peer response, because they realized that not all research in this area is going to be those super strict controlled experiments.
So they wanted to capture the full range of what's happening in classrooms.
Yes, exactly. So they ended up analyzing 26 different studies.
Wow, that's a lot of data.
It is. And they basically went through each study and figured out what kind of teaching or guidance was provided to students along with the peer response. They also noted when that instruction happened, was it at the beginning of a unit, during planning, during drafting, during the feedback sessions themselves, or during revision?
Okay, so lots of careful analysis going on. Let's get into what they found. Let's start with the studies that were all about teaching specific writing strategies. What did those studies tell us about how effective this approach is when you combine it with peer response?
Okay, so 9 of those studies focused on teaching strategies.
9 out of the 26.
Right. And here, writing strategies basically means those deliberate mental steps that good writers use to plan, draft, and revise their work.
So things like brainstorming, outlining, editing.
Exactly, those kinds of things. And the instruction in these studies aim to give students specific techniques to make those processes work better.
To make them more effective writers, essentially. Were these strategies aimed at different parts of the writing process, like some focusing on planning, others on revising, and so on?
Yeah, definitely. For example, one study by Olson back in 1990 that focused on teaching specific revision strategies. They actually showed students how to add information, delete stuff, substitute words, paraphrase, and rearrange the order of information in their writing.
So very hands-on, showing them the tools of the trade.
Exactly. And what they found was interesting. Peer response, whether or not it was combined with that explicit revision instruction, was better at improving writing than just having students write alone.
Okay, so already we're seeing the power of interaction.
Right. But here's the kicker. The group that got both peer response and the direct instruction and revision strategies, they made the biggest gains.
So the combo was the real winner. It's not just one or the other, it's both together.
Exactly. And that really highlights how powerful it can be to combine the peer feedback with actually teaching them how to revise effectively.
It's like giving them the ingredients and the recipe.
Perfect analogy. Now, another study, this one by MacArthur and some colleagues in 1991, they also looked at revision, but specifically with students who had learning disabilities. They gave these students questions that had evaluation criteria and revision strategies built in.
So like prompts to get them thinking critically about their work.
Right, things like, is anything unclear? Or where could I add more details? And what they found was that using those strategies with peers led to better writing and revisions than when students used the strategies on their own. They also noticed that the peer interaction in this study had some basic guidelines, like they asked students to tell the author what the paper was about and what they liked best. And that seemed to help students understand what good writing looks like, to develop those criteria. So even in a study that's all about strategy, that interaction piece is important.
Yeah, that theme's starting to emerge. The interaction really matters.
Right. Now, other studies that focused on strategy instruction also had good results when they added peer response, like Stoddard and MacArthur in '93. Found that combining strategy instruction, peer response, and word processing helps students with learning disabilities revise better and write better overall. Then you've got Engler and colleagues, their work on the Computer-Supported Integrated Writing Program, or CSIW. They combined strategy instruction with teaching about genre and structured peer discussion, and that led to better organization, more awareness of audience and purpose, a better understanding of text structure, and improved metacognitive knowledge.
Lots of positive outcomes there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then there's Graham and colleagues' work on self-regulated strategy development, or SRSD. They found that adding peer response to their strategy instruction, which involved planning mnemonics like POW and TREE, actually helps students apply their writing skills to new types of writing that they hadn't been specifically taught. That's pretty cool, because it suggests that the peer interaction might help them transfer those strategies they learned.
So it's not just about learning the skill in isolation, it's about being able to apply it in different contexts.
Exactly. Now, it wasn't all sunshine and roses. There was one study that stood out by Goldberg and colleagues back in '96. They taught students about the rhetorical demands of writing, things like goal, audience, function.
Making them think about the purpose of their writing.
Right. And they used this specific feedback form called PQP praise, question Polish, to guide the peer response. But they found that the revisions were really limited, mostly focused on surface errors, and there wasn't much connection between the feedback and the revisions. Overall, the quality of the writing didn't improve much.
So that's like a cautionary tale, right? Just throwing strategies in a feedback form at students isn't enough. It really matters what strategies you teach and how you do it.
Exactly. You got to be intentional about it.
Yeah.
So, to sum up the strategy-focused studies, the overall takeaway is generally positive, especially when you pair the strategy instruction with some guidance on how students should talk to each other during peer response.
And those strategies often focused on either the revision stage or the planning stage of writing.
Right. And it's also worth noting that the timing of the instruction varied across the studies. When you teach those strategies might matter too.
Okay, let's move on to those interaction-focused studies. What did they find about giving students specific rules for how to interact during peer response?
Okay, so 12 of the studies focused on this interaction instruction.
12 out of the 26.
Right. And this means giving students clear procedures or frameworks for how to organize their peer response.
So like sentence starters, roles, a step-by-step process.
Exactly. And what's really interesting here is that the findings were super consistent.
Consistent in what way? Were they generally positive?
Yes, consistently positive. For example, one study by Prater and Bermudez in '92 found that interaction instruction based on a model where the writer reads their work aloud, peers share what they liked, and then the writer asks for specific help, that led to more fluent writing. Another study by Dayud and Dalton in '93 found that having students write in pairs with some basic interaction guidelines led to more narrative elements in their writing compared to students working alone. And they noticed that the way the students collaborated was similar to good teacher-student interactions.
Interesting. So they were picking up on those effective communication patterns.
Exactly. And then another study by Zaminer in '95 found that having students write alone first and then revise in pairs was the best way to improve their narratives, especially in terms of grammar and character development.
So there might be something to that sequence of working individually and then collaboratively.
It seems like it. And a bunch of other studies also highlighted the importance of that structured interaction. Like Toth in '97 found that when you pair students of different ages with instruction in interaction, strategy, and genre, both the younger and older students' writing improved.
A win-win situation.
Totally. And then there were the paired writing studies by Sutherland and Topping in '99, Nixon and Topping in 2001, and Yarrow and Topping also in 2001. They used this specific flowchart to guide the interaction between writing partners during all stages of the writing process, and they consistently found better writing quality compared to individual work. They even found that pairing students with different skill levels or ages could be super beneficial.
So mixing it up can actually be a good thing.
Yeah, it seems to help. And then there's Boscolo and Ascordi in 2004. They found that combining interaction instruction with strategy instruction focused on clarity led to fewer gaps in information and better revision suggestions. Metcalf and colleagues in 2004 saw big improvements in younger students' writing when they were tutored by older peers, but only when the tutoring had specific interaction guidelines. And then Rouillet in 2004 found that paired writing and revision with clear interaction instructions led to more and better revisions, especially in organization. It even helped them organize their writing better in future tasks and become more aware of their writing process.
Sounds like that structured interaction really has a ripple effect.
Yeah, it seems to help them internalize those good writing habits. And then there's Duran and Malario in 2008. They showed that using peer response with defined roles, like in that paired writing approach, not only improved writing skills, but also boosted the older students' self-confidence as writers when they were tutoring.
Makes sense. They're getting that experience of teaching and guiding others.
Exactly. So we've got all these studies, and they're all pointing to the same thing, that structured interaction is crucial for making peer response work.
Hmm.
It's not enough to just throw students together and say, give each other feedback.
It's about giving them the tools and the framework to make that feedback meaningful.
Precisely. So the takeaway here is that clear structure for interaction leads to good things. Better writing, better revisions, more self-confidence as writers, and even greater awareness of their own writing process. Plus, there's a lot of potential in thoughtfully pairing students with different skills and ages.
Lots of good stuff to consider there.
Okay, so we've covered the strategy-focused studies and the interaction-focused ones. Now let's talk about those genre-focused studies, the ones where they specifically taught students about different genres of writing. What did they learn about how genre knowledge plays into effective peer response?
Yeah, let's unpack that.
Okay, so 5 of the studies focused on instruction in genre knowledge, basically helping students understand the purpose, audience, and typical features of different types of writing. And in all these studies, the genre instruction was combined with either strategy instruction or interaction instruction, or sometimes both.
So it gets a little tricky to isolate the impact of genre knowledge all by itself, right?
Yeah, that's the main limitation here. But the findings are still really useful. For example, one study by Kosfis and Masulsowski in 2001 used a writer's workshop approach that integrated teaching about genre characteristics, explicit strategy use, and structured peer interaction. And they found that it helps students think about good writing in a broader way, beyond just surface-level stuff like grammar and spelling.
They were thinking about the bigger picture of what makes writing effective.
Exactly. And they also found that peer interaction was more helpful for generating ideas than for revising. Peterson in 2003 also used a writer's workshop model with genre instruction, this time focusing on character description and effective beginnings. They also included strategy-related cues and interaction guidelines. And they observed that students revised their writing at different levels of the text and became more aware of their audience.
So again, we're seeing that awareness of purpose and audience coming through.
Right. And then there's Sims in 2001. They combined genre instruction through analyzing model texts, strategy instruction, and interaction instruction using reader response journals. And that led to overall improvements in writing skills and fluency. And Corden's research in 2002 and 2007 used model text analysis, genre-focused writing conferences, and structured interaction in writers' workshops. They saw big progress in understanding narrative structure and style, developing a more sophisticated meta-language, and even boosting self-esteem as writers.
So it seems like that genre instruction gave students a shared framework, a way to think and talk about writing in a more focused way.
Yeah, it gave them a common language, a set of criteria to work with. But, as you mentioned, the fact that it was always combined with other types of instruction means we can't say for sure how much of the positive effect was specifically from the genre instruction.
So it's more of a suggestive finding than a definitive one.
Exactly. But
Yeah.
it's still really interesting to see how consistently these interventions focused on those bigger text features, like overall structure and style.
Okay, so let's bring it all together. What are the big takeaways from all of this research on peer feedback, specifically for those younger writers? For someone listening who wants to make peer response work better, what should they focus on?
The biggest, most important takeaway is this. In almost all the studies, 25 out of the 26, peer response was most effective when it was paired with some kind of instruction.
So just having kids give each other feedback without any guidance, that's not going to cut it.
Not really, no. You need to teach them how to do it well. Because without that guidance, you run into problems like superficial feedback, where they only focus on little errors, or students having trouble seeing their own writing from a reader's perspective.
It's back to that how being just as important as the what.
Exactly. And what the research really shows is that a lot of the best interventions used a combo of those instructional components, teaching strategies, giving clear interaction guidelines, and building genre knowledge. It suggests that these things can work together really powerfully.
They reinforce each other.
Right. But if we had to pick one component that consistently seems to make a difference, it would be interaction instruction. The studies that focused on giving students clear rules, procedures, or frameworks for how to talk about their writing during peer response, those had super consistent positive effects.
So teaching them how to give and receive feedback is key.
That's the big takeaway. Now, strategy instruction and genre knowledge instruction, those also showed promise. But it's harder to isolate their individual effects because they were so often combined with interaction instruction.
And there weren't many studies that directly compared them head to head.
Right. But the overall picture suggests that using all three teaching strategies, Setting clear interaction rules and building genre knowledge, that's likely the most effective approach.
So it's a multi-pronged approach that works best.
Exactly. And at the heart of it all is that guided conversation between peers, especially when they're giving feedback on those early drafts.
And we also have to remember that some of these studies had limitations, right? Like not having control groups or not randomly assigning students to different conditions. So we have to be careful about making sweeping generalizations.
Absolutely. The evidence is stronger for some things than others, and more research is always helpful.
Always room for more exploration. So for you listening, the big picture is this peer response can be a really powerful tool for improving writing, but it really depends on how you use it. It's not a magic bullet. The research is telling us loud and clear that you need to be deliberate about the instruction, especially in structuring how students interact, and potentially also in teaching specific strategies and building their understanding of different genres.
Yeah, spot on. The research really emphasizes that you need to give students the skills to have meaningful conversations about writing, to give constructive feedback, and to actually use the feedback they get to make their own writing better.
So think about this. How do you approach giving or seeking feedback in your own learning or work? What specific things about strategy, interaction, or genre awareness could you focus on to make that feedback more valuable? Maybe even check out some of the methods we talked about today, like the paired writing flowchart or those think sheets that guide peer interaction.
It all comes down to being intentional about the process, whether you're giving or receiving the feedback. Think about the purpose of the writing, have a structured way to interact, and go beyond just surface-level errors. Those are all key to making feedback really work.
So much to chew on there. Hopefully some aha moments for you. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. We hope it's given you some insights into the power of peer feedback, and more importantly, how to make it work its magic. Until next time, keep exploring.
Thanks for having me.
And thanks to you for listening.
See you later.
See you later.